Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we will dive into a very exciting topic, from posters to practice, how leaders shape culture. This session is eligible for HRCI, SHRM, and ATD professional development credits. Now let's meet today's speakers.
Hi, I'm Michael Rochelle, Chief Strategy Officer and Principal Analyst here at the Brandon Hall Group. Look forward to having a very interesting and lively discussion with two of the best experts I know in the space, both Lynn and Steve. And if you could introduce both of yourselves, I think people are really going to enjoy not only the slides you put together, but the excellent commentary. We've had a lot of great discussions leading up to this webinar and can't wait for them to share their knowledge and expertise with you.
Yeah, very good. Hi, everybody. I am Lynne Gallacher, VP Client Relationships in the talent practice of Gallagher. Over the past 22 years, I've had the honor of working with literally hundreds of clients across about 6 continents, 48 countries, enabling both their leadership and sales teams to develop capabilities, perform to their potential, and ultimately deliver business results. And so to some of my valued clients I see in this webinar, and to all, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm dearly hopeful each of you will take away one insight that you'll be able to apply in your organization to move the needle on your culture.
Thanks so much, Lynn.
Steve, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Steve Dion. I'm the National Managing Director of Leadership and Organizational Development, and I'm excited to share the stage with my friend of the North here, Lynn,
Yeah.
and talk a little bit about culture. I have spent about 20 years in my career in corporate HR work before getting into consulting, and I left that work as a chief HR officer of a publicly traded financial services company to start a consulting career about 20 years ago, because really my passion was around creating healthy corporate cultures and the role that leaders play in that work. So over the 18 years, I've been delighted to have a chance to work with many organizations talking about culture. And Gallagher purchased the business that I was running about a year ago. So now I'm able to bring what we did as a boutique consulting business into a very large organization and really enable this work across thousands and thousands of clients. So looking forward to digging deep with you today.
Well, thanks, Lynn, Steve.
A huge shout out to today's webinar sponsor, Gallagher. Gallagher is a global provider of insurance, risk management, and HR consulting solutions with over 70,000 employees and operating in over 130 countries. Within its HR consulting practice, Gallagher helps people and organizations to secure a confident future through its proactive people strategies. Their trusted experts optimize your health and benefits investments, address the financial well-being of your organization and people, and today we'll focus on their talent practice, which maximizes the engagement of your people and the performance of your organization. Please be sure to visit them at www.aig.com to learn more. Thank you again, Gallagher. Now, before we dive into today's content, let me tell you about Brennan Hall Group and some incredible opportunities that could accelerate your career. Brennan Hall Group is a leading professional development firm that has been serving learning, talent, and HR executives worldwide for more than 30 years. We've advanced the growth and performance of millions of employees and leaders through our cloud-based platform, delivering evidence-based research, data, and certification programs that empower organizations to achieve excellence in every area of human capital management. Our impact spans more than 10 million employees and executives globally, supported by our comprehensive research library, strategic insights, and prestigious awards program. Below is a sample of the organizations we are proud to partner with. We have incredible learning and networking opportunities, our two BRIC events happening later this year, our AI Summit on October 15th, and our Leadership Summit on November 17th and 18th. And don't forget to save the date for next year's 2027 HCM Excellence Conference, happening January 26th through the 28th. All details for everything I've mentioned will be available in a PDF you'll receive within 24 hours after this webinar. Now, based off everything I just went over, I would like to know what you would like to learn more about. Is it our institute, our awards program, the 2027 HCM Excellence Conference, or maybe it's one of our BRIC events? I will leave this poll open for just a few more seconds. All right. Thank you, everyone. All right, and we are excited to share that at the end of today's webinar, we will be selecting one lucky raffle winner to win $100 off a Brennan Hall Group Institute membership. Stay tuned to see if you are the lucky winner. You must be present to win. And finally, just a few quick things to note. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the questions panel in your control bar. We'll be answering them throughout the session. We're also recording today's webinar, and you'll receive an email within 24 hours with a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides. The chat box is open, so feel free to share your thoughts as we go along. Your input makes this more valuable for everyone. Now I'd like to pass things off to Michael.
Thanks, Ivy. We're pretty excited about this because I think we're going to be covering a very unique, the four levers of culture, which is I'm looking forward to everyone learning about from Lynn and Steve. It's a very super cool way to look at what really drives culture. Very understandable, but let's talk about reality, and the reality being a culture is an output of systems and leadership. We can't have culture just be that thing that we feel. Hairs on the back of our neck, perceived ways of doing things. This is good and this is bad. That's very subjective, and that's why a lot of culture efforts stall. And Lynn and Steve are going to get into what happens where training without structural change leads to a culture stall. And then misalignment is really important too. There's going to be a lot of discussion around what leaders intend versus what's reinforced. And that misalignment is what really kind of leads to gaps. I kind of think about culture when we do our research as like being a quilt. And it's very important how that quilt comes together and the seams between them. And when leaders don't reinforce what's intended, then you begin to get gaps and pulls in that quilt, and that destroys the culture of an organization. And my favorite is Lynn and Steve are going to go through practical actions that you can take. So you're going to be able to walk away with key things that you can do after this discussion. So looking forward to it. As Ivy pointed out, start asking questions in the chat. Love to get them lined up, get them up on the tarmac so we can be able to have them take off and get them answered by our experts. So we're just going to do an icebreaker right now and another poll. Well, what we'd like to know is which phase is your organization most closely match when it comes to your talent management strategy and processes? And we're going to be sharing this with the entire audience and having Steve and Lynn weigh in as well. This will also give us an understanding of like, where are you right now in terms of your thought process as you approach this webinar? Okay, let's take a look. So it actually lines up fairly well with our research, where organizations are almost evenly split between the two, with standard and strategic being the top two as far as distribution. Lynn and Stephen, all the work that you've done, both as head practitioners and in your roles now, do you think that kind of aligns where you see people as far as their talent management maturity and progression?
I'll make a comment. I do actually, and in fact, oftentimes we'll tend to see a little bit more phase two, and maybe a little bit lighter on phase three and phase four. You're very delighted for today because the reality is, as it relates to the organizational component of talent management, this will give us a tremendous opportunity to start to move from 1 to 2 to 3, and ideally even 4, as it relates to certainly cultural dimensions.
Steve?
I agree with that too, Michael. And I would assume that if somebody's choosing a webinar on culture, that they're further up the phases here. So it's exciting to see that we have people that are not in that basic hierarchy and need, beginning stages of this work and want to take their organization to the next level. So perfect for the content we have to share today.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
So what is culture? Let's talk a little bit about this before we get too deep into kind of level set this subject. So excited to dig in with the group about culture, because one of the things that we hear people say is it's a really nebulous term. So from our definition, simply put, culture is the way we are expected to do things at work. So it is the organization's shared values and beliefs. I mean, typically those come from senior managers. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And that group creates behavioral norms that guide the way we do work, interactions with others, the way decisions are made. So it's kind of the rules of the game that we play. We all decide to join an organization, and then we're expected to behave certain ways. And culture sometimes is created from that, or we can create that culture itself. But at the end of the day, what I really want to share about today, and we're going to come back to this again and again, is the behaviors that are exhibited at work, which come from the mindsets of leaders and the things that they value, become the way work is expected to happen, and therefore creates your culture.
Yeah. And Steve, I would build on that and also describe culture, organizational culture, as an outcome. And it's the result of the majority of people in an organization demonstrating consistent behaviors that have been informed by the underlying shared values for the organization. And ultimately, it translates to how people show up and get work done.
So let's go through that. It's an interesting segue for both. So if you had to boil it all down to a 30-second definition of organizational culture, kind of like that plain language, Steve, how would you describe it in 30 seconds?
I think it is, again, the behavioral norms that create expected ways that we work in an organization. So I think stopping there is a really short, good, clean definition. Trying not to get too academic, to HROD, IO psychology speak, but to be able to have a conversation internally that says, when you're here, what's really expected? And if that doesn't happen, where do things go? So it's about the behaviors that happen in an organization.
Yeah, totally agree.
And so just kind of a follow-up, Steve, there's a lot of things that you brought up, but kind of focusing in on the importance of culture. Why are executives not spending more effort to cultivate a healthy and productive culture?
It's a very good question, Michael. Well, I would first say, culture is probably, one half of a class that you have in business school. It's not something that I think is really taught or understood for leaders coming into an organization. And so they really don't appreciate how culture drives business success in general. There are CEOs that talk about, culture eats strategy for breakfast and all these sort of, catchy phrases that basically say, I understand that I'm creating this entity that is feeding itself, and we need to manage the dynamics of that entity. But there are a lot of leaders that really just either don't appreciate the importance of culture, or they really don't think they can manage it. I think that's the other part, is they may understand it's important, but they just think it's too big and nebulous. So they say, let's just do things and hopefully we create the right outcomes. And we're here today to say there is a formula and work that you can do to drive and create the culture that you want.
So it's interesting, and to put you both on the spot. It's really great language and it's great understanding. But I was wondering if you could share a quick example where like that, let's put in quotes, the official culture sounds great on paper. Mission accomplished. We're in that boardroom. We got it all down. We shared it with everyone. But the real culture showed up in behavior. What do you do about that? Like, how do you address that? What's the example that we want to leave everyone? Because I'm sure everyone's nodding their head right now about this.
Yeah, gosh, Michael, I have so many examples. Sadly, this is often the case where stated cultural values, they do differ from actual behaviors, which define the real culture in the organization. And I'll give a common example that I hear of late from senior leaders, and that is the desire to create a culture of accountability or a culture of empowerment where people, I hear people own their role, okay, across the organization, deep wide. And yet for many reasons, and we'll unpack this as we continue, people in the organization from frontline to middle management, they continue to look to senior leaders to set direction, solve problems, and make decisions. So that is one cultural theme I see quite regularly across many clients.
I'll give an
Steve, what about
example.
you?
Yeah. So, gosh, first, I would say most employees, I think every employee can give you many examples of saying, we say we do this, but let me tell you what I see around here from other people. But one particular example that comes to mind for me is having a conversation with a global manufacturing organization that we work with. And they have some very strong stated values about trust and empowerment and local decision making. And they say those words, on the wall in town hall meetings. But the CEO is known for walking around at 4 o'clock, kind of looking around, talking to people, asking, where is this person? Why are they not here anymore? And it just sends messages that we don't trust you. Or if I don't see you, I assume you're not working. And it goes completely counter to all of the corporate communication messages and all the work they've tried to put towards this, because of the way this CEO sort of neurotically can't help himself, but sort of walk the halls and count seats.
I like those examples. And I've been asking questions to the audience too. We'd love to hear from you. Like, what does your stated culture differ from your actual culture? If you can give examples as well, more than happy to share on what questions it raises for you. Okay, let's continue our journey.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to ask another poll question, and that's what stands in the way of creating the culture you want? Is it not a business priority, lack of leadership support, misaligned incentives and systems, or is it just you just don't know what to do, which is an okay answer as well. And if anyone has an additional answer, they can also throw it into the chat just for color. But tell us your thoughts. Okay, let's see what people said.
Okay.
That's pretty clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Really clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting because what I was going to ask you about, and it's like someone stole my line, Steve and Lynn, as I was going to focus on, why is lack of leadership such a problem? And here we go. 42% of the organization actually pointed out that it's lack of leadership. So I guess it's no surprise. So from third-party research, we know it's the number one barrier, just to let everybody know. And the enabler to people applying what they learn in training is all based on that leadership support. Uh, Misaligned incentives. We're hardwired, right? Talk about
Right.
these things. And then also where reward gets repeated. But I'd love to get your thoughts on like, what do you see as the major drivers behind these two? It lines up pretty well with what we were going to discuss. Maybe both of you can jump in and share your thoughts about those two top ones.
Yeah, no surprise here at all, Michael, as you've described. And we know there's a lot of evidence and research that supports both of these themes, lack of leadership support and misaligned incentive systems. With leadership support, to the information you shared, and gosh, we see it in a lot of our change work and development work as well. That if we don't see intentional actions on the part of leaders to actively champion, coach, support, reinforce day to day, the initiatives will fail. They just will. And with misaligned incentive systems, we know what gets rewarded gets repeated, right? And often that is the case where we see that misalignment, and it just sends tremendously mixed messages and ultimately compromises culture.
Steve, any thoughts?
Well, we're definitely going to talk about those two items that have the highest score as we go through this. So that's great. The only other comment I would make is connecting the first and the second here. So lack of leadership support says to me that it's not a business priority. So the other thing I think we need to do as senior HR executives is to say, if this is your business priority and you 95% of you say it is, then what are you actively doing? And don't make this an HR sponsored initiative. So it requires people's time and effort. So I would tie 1 and 2 together, but let's move on. And I think we can close some of those gaps as we move forward in our hour together.
So, Steve, and to Lynn, why do some organizations end up with cultures that don't match their values?
Well, we put on the screen here 4 particular barriers I think that happen in creating healthy cultures. First, and we've touched on this a bit already, right? It's complex. It's sort of all in. It's everything you do. It's holistic, and so it's seemingly very intangible information. So I know we only had 11% of people that said they don't know what to do, but even within that, it's still like what in what order, how do we get resources? It's a big freighter to steer. On top of that, human behavior is hard to change. And I think this is a really important part, right? So people come into an organization, especially senior leaders, wanting to lead in a certain way and possibly not wanting to team with each other. So, first and foremost, it's really important for the organization to talk about culture again and again and have a consistent process and system. And we'll talk about that. And to call out those negative, unhealthy behaviors if you know what's important and required. So it requires skills like accountability, conflict management, communication, things that will help people focus on the behaviors that we're looking for. And we'll show you examples of how organizations break these things down into bite-sized, digestible hunks to be able to handle the complex, part of this work to get the movement that they need to have. But I think I'll do those first two. Lynn, you want to cover the other two?
Yeah, sure. So an interesting, the third and the fourth very much align to our 2 most popular scores in the poll we just completed. And so these would probably come as no surprise at all because many of you here are experiencing them as well. I will just say in both cases, like the third and the fourth, this is about the environment, right? This is about the environment that we work within. And the reality is we know environment shapes human behavior. Either favorably or unfavorably. And in the case of operating systems, the reality is things like metrics, incentives, decision rights, they will by far drive behavior far more than stated values on a poster. And I'll maybe give one example, which it really vividly brought it to life in some of the work we've done. We had a global client who was interested in creating a culture of agile decision making throughout the organization. We trained them on how to feel comfortable with incomplete information, a very rigorous process to be able to make decisions with 80% of the most critical information. And so the learning was there. The team was equipped with the skills to be able to be agile decision makers. But there was a critical structural gap that remained, and that was decision rights. So in this case, the decision rights were unchanged. All managers required a senior approval for decisions, even at $5,000. And so, as you can imagine, the culture of agile decision making it remained unchanged. We did make the progress there, because of course in this case slow bottleneck procedural requirements for senior level approval would override anything else that took place. And so that's a real one, and it shows up in many different contexts that I think many of our listeners can relate to. I won't go into as much detail on the undesirable culture, because that was rated very highly. I think we all know actions speak louder than words, and that holds true for leaders too. And I think we can all relate to situations where there's a well-articulated, potentially well or not well-articulated description of the culture that we want to see. And sadly, we don't see leaders aligning their behaviors in support of that. And hence it doesn't work.
So just a follow question to both of you, and it's a great articulation of all four barriers. And I ask the audience as well if how these resonate within their organizational setting. So feel free to jump in. But I know, Steve, you've had the role before. Lynn, you've met a lot with CHROs, but if there is a CHRO in the audience, or if I am a CHRO listening, and they say, yep, nailed it, that's us. How can I start separating what's generally a system problem and what's more of a leadership behavior problem?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll start here and say, the simple answer is by process of elimination. Okay. So let's say, for example, we have an organization that really has a desire for a culture of innovation. And they've defined behaviorally things like we seek to understand different perspectives, we challenge the status quo, we value unconventional ways of solving problems. In that environment, the first place we can go is ask the question, to what extent do we see our leaders demonstrating those same behaviors? And if the answer is no, we realistically probably have a leadership behavior problem. If the answer is yes, chances are we do have a systemic problem that is either being motivated, incented, recognized, or rewarded in a situation of lack of innovation.
Steve, your thoughts?
Yeah, very well said, Lynn. I would have said the same thing. I would add to that, though, don't let leaders or people talk you out of their behavior problem by saying it's a system problem. I think there are many times in an organization when areas are not performing and people are blaming a broken system or a broken culture or a broken process. Those can be the case, but I think if you take time to do your audit on your operating system, look at your behaviors, your systems, what you write down, and go back to that. You write it at the time you write it, and you're just like, it's so clear. Well, 5 years later, it's embedded in the culture. And then people just do what they do every day. They walk in and they do what they do. We'll go back and look at that and go, this is what we said this should be, and this is what you're doing. And if they're not aligned and the process was written well, call people out on that. Look for models people in your culture that do this well, and point to that if we can do it within this area against what we said are the way we win, then others should be able to do the same thing. So I just would point out this notion of let's not hide behind saying it's a faulty process, which I see too often.
Yeah, and there's a couple of great comments that are being brought up that Regina brings up, and I love this one. The common denominator is effective, deliberate communication within multi-generations. Everyone young and old demands and desires to be valued and respected, but mindsets get in the way of that. What do you think about that statement?
Well, I'll start. I think it's really important to define a culture in a way that allows everybody to operate within it. The whole notion of this, or the way we operate, doesn't mean it should be consistent with a very narrow view of how one talks and operates. You'll see some examples though later. So I think we can unpack this a little bit later when we see examples of, in an organization, if innovation wins here, for example, it looks like this. You can behave different ways to bring in your personality, your style, your own individuality, but there are also certain out of bounds behaviors to say, if we believe in moving fast here, fast looks like this. You just can't say, well, I like to check my boxes 10 times and I'll get to you when I get to you. No, we got to figure out a way that you can be authentic to yourself and, give accurate information, but do it in a way that fits our business need. And so I think there's a bit of a give and take there, but we definitely don't want to imply that culture means you don't bring diversity, inclusion, and belonging along with it.
So,
Yeah.
Lynn, I want to give you a spin on a second comment that was made by Jessica. She says at a certain point, employees see the entire culture and values conversation, I should say, by leadership as performative rather than genuine, and it all falls apart. Kind of that imposter syndrome with leadership. I think that's a very astute comment.
Yeah, Jessica, very astute comment. And gosh, we know, right, the importance of authenticity to leadership, to engagement, to empowerment, and to organizational performance and success as well. And so, absolutely, I don't believe it will necessarily translate to ingenuous behaviors on the part of leadership, but gosh, when they do exist, that is room for and cause for some concern. And let's face it, if we don't feel our leaders are genuinely, authentically committed to new cultural direction, we can sure expect their people won't be as well.
Thanks, folks. Keep the comments and the questions coming. So let's continue the journey. So we're going to ask for another poll. And what we want to know is what primarily creates culture in your organization. And it's not meant to be a trick question, but what we're trying to get at here is, do you see it as a value-based culture? It's shaped around leaders' behaviors, how they think and act and set an example. Is it a function of how training programs, or is it around policy and the way in which we roll out talent programs? And again, always feel free to throw in something else that creates culture in your organization. Okay, let's see what people said. Okay, so that is pretty straightforward. So we've got over 8 out of 10 people in the audience saying it's how leaders think and act and behave is what sets the culture. So from that, we know that it can be, Lynn and Steve, it can be like all of the above, but it's so overwhelmingly shifted towards leaders' behaviors. Maybe we should start there. And I know that in our talk, you often bring up that leaders' behavior set the example.
Yeah, very much. And I think maybe the answer, and we'll talk more about this as we go deeper, is all of the above. But isn't it interesting? There's a theme here emerging from our audience, and this is a little surprising to me. I expected we'd maybe see a little skew both to leaders' behavior as well as to corporate values, right? Because it is true that ideally, culture is defined on the basis of values that are translated into observable, measurable behaviors as well. And so they ultimately create the input, like probably the most foundational input to shape culture. I do find this fascinating, though, that ultimately there's a strong belief, and there's a lot of research. There's vast research to substantiate it, that what leaders do or don't do is the make or break ultimately.
I love that. Steve, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, first I would say if we ask the same poll question to a cross section of middle and senior leaders that are not HR leaders, I would surmise that you would have a lot of people saying It's about the programs and policies we have. It's not about my behavior. Because I
Hmm.
don't think that many leaders, at least in my many years of doing this work, that most leaders really realize the power that they wield in the way that they behave each and every single day. So we're a little bit of a preaching to the choir group here today. But that said, this speaks exactly to the belief of the work I've been doing for 35 years. It is a leader's behavior. Sort of the trick part of this question, though, is to get consistent leader behavior, we need the other three to happen. That doesn't
Love
just
that.
happen by hiring good leaders. We need to say, this is what winning looks like here. We need programs around that. We all need to be sharpening our saw every day to come in, in a consistent way to behaving to what the task at hand in this company needs, not
Hmm.
just what I'm comfortable doing myself. So let's keep going, because I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that next.
Yeah, great segue. So we're at that four levers for cultural change. So you want to walk us through, and then I have some questions for you guys.
Yeah. So to help create a simple way for organizations to think about how to impact and change culture, we at Gallagher created this four-step or four lever model. First is signals, and it's what leaders say and do. We've been talking a lot about that already today, and I think you understand the importance and power of that. We then talk about the structures that organizations have: reporting rights, reporting lines, decision rights, meetings, how we operate. Uh, Third is systems. And so those are what you measure, what you reward, hiring, performance, strategy, finance, those types of things. And then last is stories. So that's recognition, who and what gets celebrated. This is not intended to be a linear model. All four of these things interact constantly with each other, that the systems you create change the way leaders behave and change the structure, et cetera, throughout the work that we do. But this gives us four categories to break down information that are very different elements of how an organization operates and balance these different items. There are some organizations, or I would even say consulting partners, that you would work with, that if they're oriented towards systems, they're going to come in and want to change all your systems. If we just create the right performance management system and the right KPIs, your business performance and your culture shifts. When I was a CHRO many decades ago, I hired some of those people. I don't believe that to be the case. Do we need good systems? Absolutely. Does everybody know how to be a good performance leader? No, they don't. So a good, robust system will help change those signals and those behaviors that a leader, conducts right up front. But at the end of the day, it really is a lot about those signals, or what those leaders do, enabled through the rest of this model. Underpinning this, in addition, is, of course, we need to have strong connection to strategy, communication. This is meant to be kind of the top level of the levers. And then underneath there, as we do our consulting practice, we help organizations think through how do they operationalize each of these items. But let's pause there and see how people think about this very simple way to think about the four levers of culture change.
While people are mulling that over, kind of a question to both of you is, from a leadership development angle, which of these levers do you find leaders have the most direct influence over? And what are a couple of practical moves they can make in the next 90 days? Seems to be that leadership theme that we have going through. So I want to throw that out to you both.
Yeah, and just reinforcing Steve's comment, I think as it relates to leadership influence control, it would be number one. It would be the signals as Steve just described. In terms of net 90 days, I encourage leaders to start, much like the comments you put in chat, Michael, as well, with some critical self-reflection, asking themselves the tough questions. And yeah, I think for the best leaders, asking that question, what am I doing? Like, very intentionally, what am I doing that is undermining what I want my people to do? And I think with a clear lens, that can start to shed some light on opportunities for shifts. And better yet, the best leaders will even ask that same question of their leadership peers, their leadership team, and even their team members, right? With a genuine desire to hear the honest truth.
And why organizational signals is first here, what leaders say and do, is that really is where a change effort starts. I think if you start by changing structure and systems and the leaders aren't in front of it saying, I'm not happy with where we are. We got to this place. We should be here. Here's why. This is what you can expect of me. Call me out on this. This is what I expect of you. I will call you on that. We'll make a better place, and then we'll support it with structure and systems. It needs to start with those leaders up front being, as we talked a little bit earlier, authentic, personable. And for those of you that are managing culture programs, if your leaders aren't there or ready for it, it requires a leadership development effort. At the end, I'm going to share our catalog of over 60 leadership development courses, because I think it's really important that you teach change management skills, feedback skills, listening skills, accountability skills. Some leaders, they could have worked in an organization for many, many years and are still behaving counterproductively, and it's a blind spot for them. And so starting with a leadership development program, and you'll see a case study when we get to it, that was embedded in the way that we did that work there too.
Since you brought up listening, something we haven't covered. Employee listening surveys, try to measurement engagement. People throw it as a cultural barometer. Other elements like satisfaction, motivation. Do they want to be here, Steve? Do you recommend these tools to help understand, maybe share greater light on the four levers?
Absolutely. I think it's very important that you measure in a very non-biased way what's going on in the organization. If HR folks are driving this effort and they're determining what's broken by who walks into their office or schedules a meeting and tells their story, that they're only getting some, what I would call a vivid data point or a skewed data point. So being able to go out and measure engagement, culture, what's going on in organizations, I think is a very important element of this. It doesn't have to be, this huge, crazy analytical tool. We at Gallagher have a survey, team that can do everything pretty small surveys to pretty big and complicated ones. But I do think it starts with collecting some information about what's going on. And we also know that subcultures get created. So when you look at this sort of in aggregate, it's really hard to sort of parse out where are some differences there. And if you can do a survey by location, by function, by leader who creates these microcultures, you can then get a little bit more surgical, really, about where you want to spend your time and how to move the needle with this work.
Okay, let's keep going. So our last poll we're going to ask is, which lever is the hardest to change your organization? So back to that slide before, the signals around leadership behaviors, those structures and processes that Steve talked about, that systems approach, or the stories themselves recognizing people for showing the right behaviors. Okay, let's see what people said. Well, there's your structure and processes finally coming back. Steve, making the comeback. Still leadership behaviors, but you can see, to your point, you were waiting to see more policies and procedures and processes in place. So I think people are tracking with you. Question to both of you. If an organization picked one system and one leadership behavior to focus on in the next quarter, what combination would you each bet on to make the biggest cultural difference?
Yeah, okay. I'll mention my number one leadership behavior, or maybe it's two, would be vulnerability and humility, right? Openly admitting to the organization and themselves that we all need to change, starting with me, the senior leader. So I think by far that would be my number one leadership behavior. On the system front, I would go back to one of our earlier polls and say aligning reward and recognition systems, because we know what we measure and treasure and ultimately reward is going to have a pretty material impact on the behaviors that show up in our people. Right. What is rewarded is repeated. And so I would focus lots of time there.
I think that was well said. I want to get to our two examples. So I'll save my comments for the next section.
Yes, we're going to jump there and cover those case studies. So we're going to move things along here. Some of the pieces that we've already talked about are embedding a new culture. We're going to be getting into more depth around that with the case studies. And then I think on our next point is here we are talking about creating a sales culture. So maybe we can start here on the sales excellence culture.
Yeah, okay. And maybe if I may just to give a little bit of context, the image that you see there is which we call our honeycomb, is essentially that is well-researched drivers of culture change and also broader organizational change, which, no surprise, they align very nicely with Steve's 4 S's that he's already shared with you. And so I'll use that construct, if I may, just to share an example that I have. And so, just for context, this was a consumer packaged goods organization in North America, and the executive leadership had a real desire to create a culture of sales excellence that would be guided by much more focus on results, performance, and leaders that were much more focused on leading versus doing, inspiring versus micromanaging, and coaching and developing their people. And so with that, we actually created a very strategic initiative with them. And I'm going to start at the top of the honeycomb at 12 o'clock, which is leadership commitment. And I'll just bring it to life for you, because there were some really pretty magical things that happened here. And so we've talked about leadership commitment throughout this webinar. The COO of this organization was our executive sponsor. And then the senior leadership team was very involved throughout. The COO was not just a figurehead. In fact, to give you one example, every week, and this went on for months, and I think it actually went on for years, the COO would send weekly emails to the entire sales organization of 250 people, reinforcing key messages and expectations, and asking team members to share their success stories. So it was a tremendously high profile activity that really did demonstrate his commitment to this initiative. So that really set a tremendously strong example. Then if we move clockwise to vision, expectations, KPIs, just really quickly, we did define 4 cultural values that we collectively believed would create sales excellence. And to break through the clutter of our day-to-day whirlwind, we branded it as well. We kind of took a chapter from some marketing principles. We branded it LEAD so that we would get higher traction, impact, and memorability. And that was very important. And that very much created a thing. Like it did make a thing of it. We set not only lagging KPIs, the more traditional sales and revenue, but we backed up to leading indicators as well, collectively defining things like number of quality of account plans, quality of leader meetings, frequency of leader meetings as an example. We did define, if we go to the next skills and competencies, we define sales and sales management competencies, and then very precisely developed a 3-year strategic development plan to build the behaviors within those competencies. So the team was fully armed and equipped to be able to demonstrate what good looks like. Continuing down the path, we had processes and systems and tools totally aligned. We defined account planning processes. We integrated them into their CRM for visibility and accountability. We had KPI dashboards that align, toolkits for easy opportunity to apply. Performance support. So this was big as well. We actually defined standard sales management meeting cadences for their weekly, bi-weekly pipeline, quarterly development meetings, team meetings, developed standard agendas and objectives for each that all sales leaders were expected to execute. And then, of course, we trained them with the skills to be able to execute them well. And then the ultimate, if we finished the honeycomb, rewards and recognition, very big motivator, was we tapped into comp as well. And so 10% of sales leader bonus was tied to the quality, frequency, and impact of the meetings, the sales management cadences that they held. And we did that and measured it by employee assessment. So the employees would actually assess it, and that was the basis for actually paying out bonus accordingly. So I would share this as an example where, and this could have been any cultural direction, but it really was a perfect example of holistically creating a system, truly a system, where all aspects of the system were all aligned towards creating the culture that was desired. And no surprise, we significantly shifted the culture accordingly.
That's an excellent case study. And Steve, you've got, on our next slide, you've got a case study as well that you want to share about Veritasify, which I think is just another intriguing example. So let's go to that slide.
Yeah, so I had an opportunity to work with an organization last year that is a 2,500 person organization that purchased another 2,500 employee organization, becoming 5,000 employees. The purchasing organization was in Europe and multiple countries around the globe. The other organization was more US based. And so we had this opportunity, and we're still going through this, but this is real-time data I wanted to share with you. So if you're thinking about where would I start with an organization if I've had a merger, this is how we started with this program. So Veritas is a private equity owned organization. They're in manufacturing and pretty commodity manufacturing organization that has, not large profit margins, but their employee base are really important. So the first thing we needed to do is to understand sort of the baseline of the culture and the aspirational culture they wanted to have. So we did focus groups and interviews. And we did an employee survey. I know we talked about that earlier. We did a third-party, online survey to all those organizations. We needed it in, I believe it was 16 or 18 languages. And we audited, we rolled that up and we analyzed that data to be able to figure out what the current practices were. While we were doing that, we were doing change management workshops for leaders. We talked earlier about that and how to enable leaders, and did some executive team sessions to get them involved in terms of baseline culture, et cetera. And the model on the right is a model that we use to help those leaders really unpack new ways of thinking. So what is a current practice? What's your underlying assumption or belief that drives why we do what we do? So pretty deep introspection to, if we want to be egalitarian, then you can't have an employee or an executive parking lot, area, for example. Moving over to values and principles, what drives them, and then ultimately newly aligned practices. So we did all of this work, and what it culminated into to try to create this unified culture and structure is on the next slide is just an example. There's two pages here of what they created. So for the global leadership team, and you can imagine there's about 10 different slides of specific items that they created, but they put it in very specific behavioral terms. So what is our value intent? So they talked about their values. So you can read here. What are the aligned leadership behaviors for those values? And we gave two specific behaviors that they created themselves. This isn't, somebody looking at a competency dictionary and picking a couple competencies and saying, let's do that. And these were words that meant something to them. And then taking it further it turned into what does good look like? Here's very specific behaviors and what breaks the value. So saying things like my site, your site. So those are very behavioral things that we learn people said, and you can say, that's not what we believe in, and that's not what this should look like. So we have this whole now deck of information that helps to paint the picture of what the culture should look like. And then on the next slide, let me share the last piece of this, was as a rolled up non-negotiables, the organization created this list of 7 specific items and what it actually means to practice these. And the CHRO, who I've known for a long while, Melanie Stepp, she's phenomenal. She presented this recently at a global leadership team meeting to roll this out. And it was everybody's work was in there. They were all kind of hands dirty from the lowest level all the way up. So now these 5,000 people have this architecture of what it looks like. And what we're doing next is talking about what are all those enablement items in terms of changing policies, programs, systems that will support what this work needs to look like.
Okay, I know we're in our home stretch. There's a couple more thoughts that we want to share, so let's continue the journey. So I'm just going to throw this out to you, Lynn. Like you spent a lot of time thinking about this. What's the approach for cultural change here?
Yeah, perfect. So my recommendation would be approach culture change like strategic change. And integrate all the aspects of your culture change plan into a strategic plan with typical defined objectives, goals, strategies, tactics, KPIs, and then develop a specific implementation plan to execute on on those strategies. So essentially, like I might summarize it as you create your organizational strategic plan that aligns with your company's business strategic plan. And I will say, since my days in corporate strategy at Kraft Foods, I am such a big fan of plan on a page. It's a great communication approach because it helps employees see the bigger picture and to see the interrelationship and the connection between different initiatives. And then it can continue to be used through implementation to track progress and to continue to communicate regularly and consistently to the organization. So that would be
And I would just say to our listeners, by the way, we don't have a chance to dig deep into this. When you get the material, go back at this slide. This model, this is money. I mean, like looking at how to think about your business in a one-page plan like this. This is a great tool or job aid that you could use for what your program could or should look like.
Speaking of
on the
money
last
slides,
page, let me just share.
Yeah, you've got another money slide coming up on your activation plan.
Yeah, and I would just say on the last slide, again, not going to go through this in detail, but when you have a chance to look back at this material, this is a way to take your information and put it into bite-sized hunks. This is what we're going to do for the year in these different categories, and plan it, make it, chart it out in 4 different categories, and help your organization see that there is a plan directly related to changing and improving and creating a healthy culture, and then execute on your plan and make a new plan the next year.
I love it. Okay, we're gonna wrap up, but before I do that, I've been holding off on a couple of important questions from the audience, so I thought this is a good time to throw it out to you, Lynn and Steve. So, one was someone was asking around the idea if there are specific challenges observed, an opportunity in terms of getting the culture aspects right with very small companies versus large ones. And the other question, that was Jessica again. And then Cecilia asked, could you share some of the measurement data points in the cultural change in that sales case study that you went through, Lynn?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure. So yeah, no, not a problem at all. I can definitely, Cecilia, I absolutely can follow up and share some measurement data with you to give you a sense. And to the first question about challenges with smaller organizations, I'll mention 2. I think, and we've talked about this throughout our webinar, the leadership, the importance of the leadership role is amplified in a small organization. And so that notion of ensuring you have very strong leadership commitment, and you're holding them accountable, and you're giving them, tough feedback will be critically important because they play such a pivotal role in shaping the organization. And then the other thing I would say is you have to be choiceful. You can't do it. Chances are you don't have broad resources. And so be very, very choiceful in terms of where you're going to, what initiatives and what levers will give you the biggest impact in your organization.
So I'm going to wrap up with a really interesting question. So, situational analysis for everybody out there. You're meeting with a CHRO, and I'm sure you've done this hundreds of times, both of you. And they just look you straight in the eye and they say, our culture isn't where we want to be. What's the one thing you tell them to do next month?
I
Okay.
would say do something active with the leadership team that shows the commitment to moving things forward. Even if you meet to talk about that we have a problem and let's agree that we have a problem, but actually do something with the people that hold the purse strings in your organization.
Lynn?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've got a few thoughts, but I think I would encourage the HR leader to connect with the executive team and ask them 3 questions: what, why, how. What specifically do you want everybody in the organization to do that they're not doing today? Why are they not doing what we want them to do? And how might the leadership team be contributing to the problem?
I think that's a great place to, we could have made this into a 4-hour workshop. I'm sure everyone's
Yeah.
feeling that out there. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And I couldn't agree with you more. Some great money slides in there. We're going to wrap this up by having Ivy announce the raffle winner. Just want to thank Lynn and Steve for just a wonderful conversation. Time goes by so quickly. Please follow up with them. They've added their LinkedIn. They've got some great assets there they can share as well. Very knowledgeable group. So please reach out and continue your discussions offline. But tell us, Ivy, who's the lucky winner?
Thank you, Michael. I'm thrilled to share that Kate Stone has won $100 off a Brennan Hall Group Institute membership. Congratulations, Kate. We'll be reaching out shortly with more details.
Any closing thoughts, Lynn, Steve?
No, I'll leave it there.
Okay, as they say, into the pool, no splash. Thanks again for joining us. Look forward to a
Thank you, Mike.
follow-on webinar to see how this all plays out. Thanks everyone for a great day, and
Wonderful.
thanks for sticking with us
Thank,
for a couple extra
Thank you. And
minutes.
anybody reach out anytime if we can be of help.
Absolutely. And if you lose their information, contact us directly and we'll put you in touch with Lynn and Steve. This is Michael Rochelle. Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
thanks, everybody.